Okay, you guys, so I just got a message. I should begin now. Yeah, I'll begin now. All right, you guys. So my name is Melis, and I'm a friend and a member of the Human Rights Association Movement for Justice. And I want to welcome you to our second lecture during our Women's Rights series on the current topic, the Istanbul Convention. And as you probably know, Turkey's withdrawal from the convention effectively was yesterday on July 1st. So I am more than honored to host today's very important and very current talk. But before I hop onto our topic and welcome our guest, Dr. Coşku Çelik, make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us, especially on Instagram, because there you will find the event schedule of our next YouTube streams during our lecture series. So, as I already mentioned, we are going to talk to Dr. Coşku Çelik. She is an assisting professor in political science at York University in Canada, and she's also a steering committee member of the Social Right Association in Istanbul. So Coşku will talk about the link between feminization of poverty and domestic violence in Turkey. So I'm going to hand over to Coşku. She's going to come in now.
Hello. Thank you.
Hi, Coşku. Thanks for joining our today's talk. I just gave our viewers a brief introduction, but before we start, I want to mention again that we would love to read some questions from you guys. So make sure to ask us throughout Coşku's presentation. But we also have some updates today from our lovely last speaker that was on our live, Merve Ömeroğlu.
Hello.
Merve, the stage is yours.
Hello to everyone.
Hi.
I'm starting. Maybe some of you know that I was here a few days ago to talk about the Istanbul Convention's importance for Turkey and the current situation on national law. But during those past 4 days, so many negative changes have emerged on this issue. And we wanted to talk about this before Coşku starts to talk about the feminization of poverty and domestic violence in Turkey. I'll briefly explain and then I'll leave the floor to Coşku. As I talked about before, the Secretary General of the Council of Europe had announced that the withdrawal of Turkey from the Istanbul Convention will enter into force on the 1st of July, which is yesterday. And also, we and many other organizations had filed nullity cases by claiming that the withdrawal decision is clearly contrary to the Turkish constitution. And we were waiting for the Council of State to decide until yesterday because it must be before the denunciation entered into force. However, 2 days ago, the Council of State rejected all requests regarding withdrawal process. And so as of yesterday, the 1st of July, Turkey officially seems to have withdrawn from the Istanbul Convention. But again, as I mentioned before, the legal struggle will continue by such as applying to the Constitutional Court or in Turkey or to the European Court of Human Rights as a next step. And also it's now the time for the Council of Europe to assess Turkey's withdrawal decision under general international law. That's all I wanted to explain for now. And I'm looking forward to listening to Coşku. Thank you and good evening to all.
Well, thank you so much. I'm just gonna, hand over to Coşku.
Thank you. Let me share my screen first. Do you see it now? Okay, perfect. First of all, I want to thank you all, Movement for Justice folks, for organizing this lecture series on women's rights and inviting us to collaborate. On Monday, my friend and comrade Merve, who you just listened, made a very informative presentation on the significance of the Istanbul Convention by referring to its specific details. Today, I will proceed from where she stopped and discuss domestic violence in relation to broader gender inequalities in Turkey. Actually, I use the term domestic violence to include, obviously, femicides as well. And by the term domestic violence, I mean the violence within the households. Actually, there's another term mostly preferred recently instead of domestic violence, which is intimate partner violence. I could have used that as well, but I preferred domestic violence because I will analyze the role of family and household in Turkey's labor market policies and welfare regime, and how women's dependency on men within the family, or male breadwinner, female caregiver model of household is reproduced in those policies, and how the significant role attributed to family and traditional family structure puts women into a subordinate position and more open to violence. Here's my outline. I will start with a brief discussion on the concept of household and family structure from a feminist perspective, the household as the main unit of capitalist patriarchy. And then I will continue with gendered characteristics of labor markets in Turkey, such as women's precarious work, women's unemployment, etc. Then I will continue with conservative and patriarchal welfare regime of Turkey, which reproduces women's subordinate role within the family and which actually results in increasing violence. Also, I will continue with what's happening right now under the context of the pandemic, how on the one hand, impoverishment of women, and on the other hand, domestic violence has increased in this context. The significance of household for capitalism is the fact that it is an arena within which the unique commodity of capitalism is produced and reproduced. And that unique commodity is labor power. Who produces and reproduces the labor power? Human beings. Women. How? By using their invisible, unpaid work within the household, or even from the beginning by giving birth, actually. So, the feminist political economy's main contribution in this sense is to reject defining the household as a black box, instead to define it as a production and reproduction unit. And reproduction of labor power simply means life-making activities, provision of food, clothing, shelter, basic safety, healthcare, etc. And as Silvia Federici puts it, in capitalism, the kitchen is a microfactory. She uses the kitchen as a metaphor to explain household, family, home. And accordingly, kitchen is a microfactory. It is the beginning of an assembly line that ends in the factories or other places of wage work. So also there's another question of what is the social setting within which this production and reproduction of labor power takes place. Actually, it is the capitalist patriarchy. Therefore, it is necessary to put the relationship between capitalism and patriarchy at the center of the analysis of family or traditional family structure for any society. And as stated by Heidi Hartman, patriarchy has not been eliminated in the context of capitalism. It shapes the modern capitalism. It shapes the form of the capitalism, just as the development of capitalism has transformed the patriarchal institutions as well, such as family. And the resulting mutual accommodation between patriarchy and capitalism created a vicious circle for women. And the household, in this sense, is a very significant unit because the distinguishing feature of capitalism is the separation of production, I mean the workplace, and the reproduction process, I mean the family, private sphere, household, etc. And reproduction takes place within the household. And the historical opportunity that patriarchy provided for capitalism is the existence of women who are ready to take care of reproduction of labor powers for free using their unpaid work. In 2019, a research on unpaid work was carried out throughout the world. And that research reported how much women would have earned in 2019 if they earned minimum wage for all of their unpaid work. And the analysis was conducted by a research company named Oxfam, and it found that globally their unpaid labor was worth almost $11 trillion in 2018. And according to the findings, that number is higher than the revenue earned by the 50 biggest companies in the world, such as Walmart, Apple, Amazon, etc., more than the 50 biggest companies in the world economy would have earned. And the gap is highest, the gap between male and female labor's use in the housework is highest in India. Indian women spend close to 6 hours a day managing household work, whereas men only spend around 50 to 52 minutes in India. Turkey has the second highest gap. Men spend less than 50 minutes a day, whilst women spend more than 5 hours for unpaid work within the household. And the Scandinavian countries, especially Sweden, Denmark, Norway, have the smallest gaps, but still they have gaps. So this part is important. Looking at countries worldwide, there is no single country in the world in which unpaid work within the household is shared equally across genders. It is not equal in any countries. And it is not surprising that the countries having smaller gap, such as Scandinavian countries, Canada, Germany, they have effective welfare systems. Welfare provisions. Actually, this is not surprising because the main factor determining the unpaid workload of women is the social policies. As social services weaken, such as healthcare services, education, elderly care, etc., they are substituted by women's unpaid work within the household. So countries having stronger welfare systems tend to have smaller gap in the gender parity in the housework. And this unpaid work is done sometimes within the household, is done sometimes through consent. How? Such as the feelings of love, loyalty, familial connections, etc. But sometimes it is done through patriarchal violence and coercion within the household, such as beating, such as rape, such as harassment, etc. Therefore, the household, in the context of capitalist patriarchy, indicates, on the one hand, a production process. On the other hand, sphere of violence for women. And these are integrally related. So speaking about violence against women is not an exclusionary factor to women's unpaid work within the family or women's role within the paid work in the labor markets, in the workplace. So now I will refer to some data on the relationship between income level and employment status with domestic violence in Turkey. Then I will critically discuss Turkey's social policies and labor market policies from a gendered perspective. According to a research carried out by Yasemin Dildar, there's a relationship between there's a significant relationship between women's participation in the paid labor and intimate partner violence. However, employment does not automatically protect women from violence. The nature of employment also matters. Irregular jobs that do not generate consistent and secure income do not empower women in case of violence, for example. Both women in formal employment and women without jobs have a lower probability of experiencing intimate partner violence than women with informal or irregular employment. Therefore, job creation, which is, I will explain, widely frequently used by the AKP governments as well, job creation itself does not mean anything. The quality of the job also matters. To what extent it is a regular job with a sufficient payments for the survival of the household or for the survival of women. So in Turkey, when we have a look at the labor markets in Turkey, just like in many other countries, labor markets are barriers of gender. And in Turkey, women have lower participation rates and work more precariously compared to men. And this is related to, most of the time, this is explained with reference to reproductive responsibilities within the household. Women have been underrepresented in employment and concentrated in low-paying and labor-intensive sectors. If you have a look at the numbers provided in the slides, between 2004 to 2014, the number of women in the labor force increased, which means during the AKP period, by the way, increased by 3 million. And the number of employed women increased by 2.6 million. And as a result, women's labor force participation rose from 23% to more than 30%. And the AKP governments used the discourse that we created employment opportunity for women. And there are arguments from different parts of the society as well that AKP governments were relatively successful in increasing female employment. But I want to explain, is it really increased women's condition in the labor markets? Because yes, maybe they created some employment, but there's a need to have a look at the characteristics of that employment as well. First, it should be mentioned that, first of all, the female employment rate in Turkey, despite this increase that the AKP government is so proud of, remains relatively low compared to the OECD average. It is way lower than the OECD average. Secondly, the employment generated for women during the AKP years have been precarious, informal, part-time, etc. And also, thirdly, this process indicates the dissolution of agrarian relations, dispossession and proletarianization of small-scale agricultural producers in the countryside. And as a result of the neoliberal transformation of agriculture right before and during the AKP governments, small-scale agricultural producers either migrated to urban centers and constituted the women in those households, constituted the most precarious segments of the workforce, or they stayed in their villages. And women, for example, have become agricultural wage laborers, and this work is not even registered. They work under extremely hard conditions, etc. So, what is the main picture right now? In 2019, Turkey had the lowest rate of women's employment among OECD countries. And the percentage was 32.1, and whereas the OECD average was more than 60%. Women also work in more insecure jobs for lower wages with less social protection compared to men. For example, in 2018, the share of women's part-time employment in women's total employment was constituted the 17.6% compared, which this ratio is only 6.4% for men. Also, when you have a look at the unemployment rates, these are the non-agricultural unemployment rates in Turkey in 2019. Overall, the rate is 16.4%. Male unemployment is 13.8%, whereas women's unemployment was 22.3%. I used the data of 2019 on purpose because I will explain what happened after the pandemic at the last part of the presentation. By the way, these are unemployment rates in narrow sense. I will explain what I mean by narrow definition of unemployment. These unemployment rates by themselves are not sufficient to understand women's low participation to workforce. Another indicator women who are not included in the unemployment statistics are women who are not ready to work because of their domestic responsibilities. They do not search for a paid job because of their domestic responsibilities, therefore they are not calculated in the unemployment rates or unemployment numbers. In 2013, more than 72% of women who do not search for a paid work explain the reason why they do not search for a paid work with their domestic responsibilities. Also, there's a strong link between women's informal work and inactivity. Because some research shows that most women registered as housewives in the official statistics can be found to be engaged in informal activities. I want to give an example about this. As Social Rights Association, we made summer schools for children in a couple of rural parts in Turkey between 2015 to 2019. In one of the towns in which we did the summer school, women mostly wanted their children to attend our summer schools because they were working as agricultural workers and they want us to take care of their children while they work on the farms. By the way, they are wage workers. It is not registered, it's an informal work, but they are wage workers. But in the registration forms, we were asking the families to fill out a registration form. And in one part of those forms, we were asking about the children's parents' occupation. Almost all women who are agricultural wage workers stated their occupation as housewife. They do not even recognize it as work. Therefore, they are not even included in the official data. Another significant labor market indicator regarding women is informal work, which is related to what I mentioned so far. And informal work is mostly seen in agriculture, entertainment and services, such as restaurants, cafe and bars, and small-scale family businesses, such as small hotels, small tourism centers, etc. And the majority of informal workers in the global south are not, which is not specific to Turkey, young women. This is related to housewife ideology. The skill they acquire for housework is used outside of home for the informal market, in the informal market, such as in the garment industry, for example. Also, they are mostly single women because when they get married and they have children, they either leave their job or they are fired. It's because of the housewife ideology that women's wage is seen as a side income within the family. This is again related to the male breadwinner household model. And most of these women are from impoverished rural or urban households. They accept low wages, inhuman work speed, because their income is like an additional income for the family, not the main income. For example, they accept to work without a social insurance because they continue using their husbands or their father's social insurance. So this is on the one hand, as I already mentioned, related to the agrarian change in the global south and in Turkey. And also this is related to the expansion of informal sector, both in urban and rural areas in the global south. And this has led to over-exploitation of women's labor in the informal sector. And in these informal works, women are not defined as workers, as I already exemplified. They are viewed as housewives. They are not included in the statistics, or they are not protected by labor laws. Also, employment in these informal jobs reproduces women's dependent role to their husbands and their fathers because of their situation as the side income, as the receiver of the side income to the household, to the family. Statistics.
Sorry to interrupt you. So you mean she's more than a helper?
Yes,
so she's more than a helper than, yeah. Yes.
They are regarded as the male breadwinner of the household is their husbands or their fathers, and they are it's a side income. So I will tell why this is related to domestic violence, because if they are alone, they cannot survive with those wages or without social insurance, health insurance, etc. And some statistics from March 2014 show that almost 50% of working women in Turkey were not registered as employed by the state. And among those, more than 2 million were unpaid workers in family enterprises, such as small-scale agricultural family businesses or small-scale family businesses like in tourism, etc. And again, almost 1 million women were employed secretly without paying social security contributions, etc. So, overall, why is this structure, gendered structure of labor markets is significant for women's overall social role within the society? Even though women's employment rates have risen in Turkey during the last 2 decades, which the government is really proud of, but instead of creating a decent work for women, the AKP governments enacted employment policies that increased informal employment of women, and this resulted in overexploitation of women. And this is directly related to the neoliberal accumulation regime that necessitates cheap labor. Women whose income is regarded as a side income, as a secondary income in the household, have constituted the significant part of the cheap labor force for the neoliberalism of Turkey. And therefore, employment creation by itself does not indicate women's economic or social empowerment. And it is not sufficient to empower them against domestic violence. Informal or precarious work reproduces women's weak and independent condition within the household. This, for example, reduces women's capacity to end their marriage when they experience domestic violence. Women primarily work in lower income jobs, and most of their work is not even registered. They work without social insurance, without health insurance, and this reproduces their dependency to male members of the family to their husbands, who are also potential murderers of women in a country like Turkey. Another factor, other than the labor markets, another factor determining women's poverty or feminization of poverty and which reproduces women's secondary or subordinate role within the society is the structure of the welfare regime in Turkey. Turkey's welfare state is mostly classified as a corporatist social security system, similar to the Southern European countries. For example, Professor Arın defines the Turkish welfare state as a minimalist welfare state, as most of the population is out of the reach of the welfare benefits or welfare protections. And mostly informal institutions such as family, religious organizations, community and kin-based relations which are quite patriarchal, by the way, are essential in assuring the welfare of citizens. And of course, role of women comes into the argument here. And in the absence of formal social protection mechanisms, which are supposed to be provided by the state, family and personal and community networks become vital for the survival of women. And the welfare regime, this welfare regime, by the way, is also marked by the policies of the AKP government, which is a synthesis of neoliberalism and Islamic notions of social solidarity. And the policymakers always prioritize the traditional family structure or the role of the family in social solidarity, and they replaced a traditional way of the provision of social aids and services with Islamic traditions of charity. And these new forms of familialism have served to reinforce the position of women as care providers. Therefore, overall, the welfare regime of Turkey reproduces a male breadwinner and female care provider model of traditional family structure. And this results in rising dependency of women upon their families, which is also the unit within which violence against women and femicides take place. So, finally, what happens to the already patriarchal structure faced the global pandemic? Actually, the global pandemic has been quite patriarchal, quite based upon the gendered inequalities throughout the world, actually, because the definition of the crisis itself was gender-based, but it has some further impacts on women in Turkey and in the poor segments of the population in Turkey. And throughout the world, as we all know, the COVID-19 pandemic resulted in the most dramatic recession since the 1930s and resulted in high levels of unemployment. Also, it resulted in the deepening of already existing inequalities in the labor markets based on job quality, gender, citizenship status, race, etc. And the pandemic overall has been surrounded by class, gender, or racial inequalities. Here, I'm going to focus on the gender, how it triggered gender inequalities. For example, women's unemployment. As a result of women's already fragile condition in the labor markets, the pandemic resulted in a significant increase in women's unemployment. And again, this is not specific to Turkey, actually, because one of the most striking examples I have seen since the beginning of the pandemic was in the US, for example. In December 2020, there were around 150,000 job losses in the US, and all of them were women. Most of them were women of color, but all of them were women. But in a country like Turkey, of course, Turkey had a quite similar trend. And according to the December 2020 data of Confederation of Progressive Trade Unions, DISC, almost 1 out of 2 women lost their jobs from March to December, and female unemployment has increased 5 times. And women's unemployment, this is the broad definition of unemployment, by the way, including women who are not searching for jobs. Women's unemployment rate has reached 45.3%, and it was 35.2% for male workers. And the number of job losses of male workers was 50% less than that of women. As I already told you, difference from the unemployment rates that I provided based on 2019, this includes the broader definition of unemployment to include women who do not search for a job for several reasons, such as domestic responsibilities. One of the most significant reasons behind women's job loss has been a sectoral distribution of women's work. And according to the ILO, International Labour Organization report on November 2020, for example, women throughout the world, women constitute more than 60% of the art, entertainment and services. And almost for 1.5 years, this industry stopped, as we all know, especially the entertainment part. And according to a research carried out by the UN in the United Nations in April 2020, almost 150,000 businesses in this sector were closed in Turkey. Also, other than the sectoral distribution, the majority of precarious and informal employees of the manufacturing sector are women. And firms that employ workers informally are mostly small and medium-sized firms, and they tend to be affected more by the economic crisis. So it results in faster job losses. And according to the calculations done by some scholars in Turkey, including Emel Memiş, 1/3 of informal workers will lose jobs permanently will lose their jobs due to the COVID-19 crisis. And other informal or unregistered workers who are not even included in the official numbers, such as agricultural workers, unpaid workers of the family businesses, or sex workers, for example, they have been all affected, and these all are the sectors in which women are widely employed, or majority of the employees are women. So about the, as I already mentioned, there's a direct direct relationship between women's work and social services. And as social policies or services weaken, it is mostly women who compensate the reproductive role normally attributed by the state. And as social policies are weakened, women's unpaid workload intensifies. Also, women tend to quit their jobs because of their increasing domestic responsibilities. And as we all know, social policies which were affected the most by the pandemic have been education and healthcare. And this has a double effect on women. First of all, majority of women paid workers of healthcare or education services are women throughout the world. But I will not go in detail of this part. And secondly, for example, schools were closed for a really long period of time. In Turkey, almost whole academic year, the schools were closed. Also, access to healthcare services has been limited, and this has increased women's domestic responsibilities such as child care, elderly care, cooking, cleaning, etc. And therefore, the ratio of women who are not even included in the unemployment data because they do not search for job they kind of voluntarily quit their job, increased in the context of the global pandemic. And also, this resulted in significant income losses for the family. And therefore, the pandemic has even impoverished women and reproduced their economic dependency on their husbands, on their fathers. And this has and probably will be reflected in the rates of domestic violence. As I underlined at the beginning of the presentation, home, household, staying at home indicates both exploitation of women's labor, and it also means patriarchal domination, male violence. The United Nations has displayed the fact that domestic violence has dramatically increased during the lockdowns throughout the world. During the 12-month period following the outbreak, almost 250 million women faced either domestic violence or sexual abuse in the world. In Turkey, there was a research made with a sample of almost 2,000 women, and that research has shown the ratio of women who faced violence during the pandemic is 43%, and the same women, the ratio for the same women, this sample of 2,000 women, was 15% before the pandemic. So it's a really significant increase from 15% to 43%. This is related, on the one hand, to being stuck at home with male members of the household, but on the other hand, this is related to the anxiety stemming from the income loss due to unemployment, for example. And as a matter of fact, many studies in the world have shown that there's a relationship between domestic violence or femicides to the financial economic crisis. There are some research on Latin American crisis, for example, or Turkey's financial crisis in 2001, or Eurozone crisis of 2008-2009, for example. In all these cases, domestic violence in those countries have increased, and this have been, unfortunately, quite similar in the context of the pandemic crisis as well, because other than being a economic crisis, within this economic and health crisis, the main slogan was "stay at home," which is a quite dangerous place for women, actually. So, therefore, I suggest that in this relationship between female poverty, women's poverty, and domestic violence, the struggle against femicides or the struggles against male violence has to include the issue of women's economic empowerment. However, by economic empowerment, I do not mean basically creating jobs. I do not mean World Bank poverty mitigation projects such as conditional cash transfers or microcredits, etc. No, women's empowerments within the household and in the workplace are internally related to each other. Women's participation in the workforce by itself does not solve the problem. Or making cash transfers to women in certain periods, just like in the case of the conditional cash transfers, do not solve the problem. Again, I will refer to Silvia Federici, her, I think, very influential statement that the kitchen is a microfactory. It is the beginning of the assembly line. To have power or to negotiate anything outside of the kitchen, outside of the household, we have to change the conditions within the household, within the reproductive work. You get a job outside of home, for example, the employer knows it. You also work for free throughout your life. Unlike men, as a woman, we go to an employer in a position of weakness, actually. When we go outside of home, we should go out with more power in our hands. not empty-handed, not still naturalizing women's duties within the household. And there is a need to first challenge the consideration of the house responsibilities within the household as natural. They are not natural, they are patriarchal. We have to say that we are working for you, capitalists. We are working for you, men. We are producing workers for you. So this is not something natural. This is quite patriarchal. So what can be done? On the one hand, labor organizations in Turkey have to include femicides and domestic violence as the main agenda of their own. Because women constitute almost half of the working class, and we produce and reproduce other workers. If women are beaten or women are murdered by men at the beginning of the assembly line within the household, saving the Istanbul Convention is a problem for which all working class and labor organizations have to fight for. On the other hand, the feminist struggle has to include the problems such as precarious work, informal work, etc., as the main agenda of their own. As long as our status in the labor markets are fragile, this results in further dependency on men who are our potential murderers. And so, yes, as we always, as feminist women in Turkey, always say, yes, Istanbul Convention saves lives. We and all labor organizations have to protest its withdrawal. But the Istanbul Convention alone cannot save women. We have to fight for equality in all aspects of life. So as long as women's subordinate role is reproduced in the economic and social policies, women will be more open to violence. We should fight for equality in all aspects of life, and we should fight for our social rights as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was, the last sentence was really impacted me a lot. Thank you for this really, really important overview. We have some questions, I think. I'm just gonna read what our viewers wanna ask you. There's one question: how is the situation for academic women, AKA women with a college degree? Can the patterns you mentioned also be applied to them? Mm-hmm. That's a very good question.
Yes, and actually very good and very important question, because in this presentation, I mentioned the condition of women in the poverty trap maybe, but violence against women is not something specific to poor women. For the lower segments of the population. For example, unfortunately, I think it was during the fall term in Turkey, an academic woman was killed by a man at home, and while she was teaching online course, for example, because as academics, we are we constitute one of the groups within the labor markets who really stuck at home. I know it. I experienced it.
Yes,
and I also know some other examples from my friends in Turkey. For example, they have a child. They say, I on the one hand teach, on the other hand I have to follow if something's going wrong with my son's online class, for example. They are doing them all together, but the same woman can say that, but my husband can take his computer, close the, shut the door of
his room,
and he can work for a whole day.
Yeah.
So it's quite different.
Yeah, but do you think, do you think the chances are higher for women in poverty?
It's much higher because it's related to, for example, even if the Istanbul Convention wasn't withdrawn, for example, on the one hand, women may not have sufficient knowledge about their rights, but on the other hand, and this is what I was trying to say actually. Despite the violence they're experiencing, despite the threat of even death they're experiencing, leaving their households may also result in death from hunger. Because they don't have secure jobs, they don't have enough incomes, etc. So women's poverty is internally related to domestic violence.
Yeah. We have another question. Thank you for that answer. How is the political religious influence on femicides? So we have a political influence, but we also have a religious influence on femicides.
Yes, there's of course, femicide rates tend to be higher in the conservative communities.
Yeah.
I really don't like underlining the relationship between religion and femicides too much, because it's kind of an orientalistic view of analyzing patriarchy.
That's true. That's true. But do you see a political influence on?
Yes, of course I see.
Yeah.
Because, for example, the governments even criminalized the Istanbul Convention.
Yeah.
They are naming this convention like the convention which destroys the traditional feminist structure, which is like the most significant thing for our country, which is untouchable, and it's criminalized. And also the numbers have increased, and if the president of the country is always yells at women during his speeches, of course this is reflected in the intimate relations within the civil society as well.
Yeah, I agree. There is a question we have, but it's a little bit off topic. Maybe you can say something about it. It's a really interesting question, though. Why is there a huge number of women not reporting those incidents to the police? Do you think they're scared? Do you think it's a lot more than we think?
Yes, actually, I can underline one more time. I think I kind of answered this already. This can be because they may not be aware of their rights. This can be because they cannot be ready to live by themselves, they cannot be ready for a new life for themselves. They may lose their children, for example, etc. So also there's another data, but I'm not sure about the numbers, but a significant part of the femicides are coming from the ex-partners. So they continue stalking, they continue threatening, etc.
Yeah.
So there are many factors, and also even when Istanbul Convention was effective, I hate using past tense right now, but
unfortunately we have to.
Yeah, when you go to police, it depends on which police officer you saw, for example. It was a bit ambiguous. They could not even take care of that. For example, I remember I even experienced that once. I experienced harassment in the streets, and the police just
didn't care.
My miniskirt. So there are.
It was So women kind of deeply know that at the end of the day, they will be the ones who are like, it's their fault.
Yes.
Yeah.
Actually, this is kind of imposed upon women.
Yeah. It's kind of, it also feels impossible for the woman to go to the police because she won't be listened to, and she has zero power.
Yes. Also, it is within the neighborhood, for example. Other people, when they go to police,
exactly,
their husbands. That's another risk.
Exactly. So it is really a vicious circle.
It's a vicious cycle.
Unfortunately. Yeah, we have another question. It has kind of something to do with the last question. Do you have any information about like civil courage in witnessing violence against women, like on the streets in Turkey, for example? I mean, personally, I can say I saw a lot of videos online of
Yes.
women, but there were always people around, but nothing happened. There are no really like statistics about civil courage in Turkey.
Yes, in terms of civil courage, you are right. But still, recording those videos is very important because they are used in the trials. So this is a little related to, because in Turkey, and this is not again specific to Turkey, when you have a look at Latin American countries, or when you have a look at Poland, it's quite similar. As long as the patriarchal violence becomes more harsh, women's feminist struggles also become stronger. We saw
That's
the
true.
streets in Istanbul yesterday, for example. So if a man tries to beat his partner on the streets, now they know that they will face some protests. They will be recorded, etc., from a feminist. They know.
Yeah. And so we know kind of the importance of media too, of social media. Those videos did in fact impact us.
Yes.
Yeah. So you think we kind of have more civil courage because of those videos? Yeah, makes sense.
And we will continue to have, because now, for example, there's another risk for the violence and harassment. But actually, I'm not sure about the details of that. They will ask for concrete evidence, for example. If they, so we will continue recording those cases, because if you interfere, it sometimes doesn't work. Of course, if the woman's life is under threat, etc., people interfere, and that makes sense. But even recording is very important. To help that woman. Yeah. Exactly,
I agree. I'm just gonna check real quick if we have one more question. Yeah, we have the last question here. It's from the audience. Do you think with an increasing financial emancipation of women in Turkey, the amount of domestic violence will tend to diminish?
It's the first step. It shouldn't be the final or ultimate goal of feminist struggle. It will be the beginning, and it's important. Participation to paid work will not itself emancipate women, or having a secure job will not by itself emancipate women from patriarchal violence, male violence, but it's a very significant first step.
Yeah, I agree. So I had one question. I think I wrote it down in the middle of your presentation. Do you think the economical situation, I mean, we talked a lot about this in your presentation, is the biggest reason for domestic violence? Or do you think it's just one of the many, many results of the patriarchy in Turkey? Or do you think, no, the financial, like the biggest reason is the dependency on women financially?
Maybe not the biggest, but one of the most.
One of the biggest, yeah.
Because as I actually, instead of the financial condition of the households, I try to exemplify how labor and social labor market and social policies are designed to protect family. As long as the economic system is designed to protect the family, this is not only related to poverty, actually. It is the whole system. This is kind of like a trap for women.
Yeah.
So we have to change this. And this is actually the case in countries having very strong social welfare regimes as well. For example, in Canada, welfare regime in Canada is built upon nuclear family. This is important, but of course there are some other factors as well. So
of course.
I don't only mean that the income level of the household matters. Also, the whole structure of the welfare policies, labor market policies, or the structure of the labor market matters.
Yeah. Great. Thank you so much for this really important overview. I personally learned a lot today. It really blew my mind that Turkey is in fact the second country with the biggest gap when it comes to women's unpaid work. Yeah, I just want to thank you again for showing us the connection between economical and sociological aspects regarding domestic violence. It's such a different view of domestic violence in general. We always talk about the more like painful side of the things, the more emotional, social side of domestic violence, but I never saw it in a very economical way. Yeah, so I thank you guys for watching us and asking us some interesting questions about our topic today. But yeah, let me see real quick if we have one more question, but I think that was it. That will be it for today, you guys. But in the following weeks, we are going to talk about other important topics, especially the Istanbul Convention in other countries. But yeah, make sure to follow us on Instagram for new updates. And I hope you guys have a great evening. And thank you so much, Coşku, for this amazing presentation.
Thank you for inviting us. And as Social Rights Association, we are always ready to collaborate in your...
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Have a great evening, you guys. Thank you so much. And I'll see you guys soon.
Bye.
Bye-bye.